Welcome to the Deep Dive. If you've ever found yourself curious about, the unseen scaffolding that holds up international relations, that intricate world of rules, rank, and courtesy known as diplomatic protocol, well, then this deep dive is for you.
We're going to try and unpack the fascinating, sometimes really surprising guidelines that shape the daily lives of diplomats.
Diplomats serving abroad, yeah, and within international organizations, too.
Exactly.
And we have quite the collection here. I mean, we're drawing insights from foundational stuff like the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations.
This big one.
Practical guides from, say, China and Serbia detailing their specific procedures. A look at how Switzerland's Federal Protocol Office works.
Right, and the UN, too. We've got manuals from Vienna and New York.
And even a peek into how a nation like Japan uses its annual diplomatic blue book to sort of frame its foreign policy. It's a real mix.
So our mission, really, is to guide you through all this material. We'll sift out the most important nuggets, flag the things that made us go, huh, and give you a clear picture of this, well, highly structured world.
Think of it as a shortcut, maybe, to understanding the hidden mechanics of diplomacy without getting totally bogged down.
Yeah, avoiding the information overload.
All right, well, let's get into it. Where do we even begin with a system this vast?
You have to start with the bedrock, really. The vast majority of diplomatic relations between countries today operate within the framework of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, the VCDR, from 1961.
Ah, the VCDR. That's the one everyone thinks of when they hear diplomatic immunity, right?
Precisely, yeah. And it's crucial because it did something pretty groundbreaking back then. It took centuries of custom, tradition about how states interact and codified it, put it all into one legally binding treaty.
And the main point was?
Well, the stated purpose is to facilitate the development of friendly relations. Basically, giving everyone a uniform set of rules. And yes, its most famous bit is definitely codifying diplomatic immunity.
So the goal is essentially to shield diplomats so they can just get on with their job freely.
That's the core idea, to make sure they can perform their functions without fear of coercion or harassment or undue influence from the host country. It really is a cornerstone of modern international relations. Almost every country has ratified it. It's seen as, one of the most successful treaties ever.
Okay, so what are the headline protections it gives? What are the really big ones?
Well, Article 22 is huge. The inviolability of mission premises, embassies, consulates, the host country authorities, police, whoever, they cannot enter without the permission of the head of mission, period.
And that extends to where they live, too.
Yep, Article 30 covers the private residence of a diplomatic agent. Same protection. And their property, documents on the premises, also protected from search or seizure.
So you can't just get a search warrant for an embassy or a diplomat's house?
Not according to the convention, no. And Article 24 specifically says mission archives and documents are inviolable, always, wherever they are.
Okay. How do they stay connected to back home? Is their communication safe?
Absolutely. Article 27 is really strong on this. The host country must permit and protect free communication for the mission for all official purposes. And here's where it gets, particularly interesting.
Go on.
The diplomatic bag. It must never be opened or detained.
Never. Like never, ever.
Never, ever. Even if there are serious grounds to suspect abuse, the rule is absolute inviolability. And the diplomatic courier carrying that bag, also inviolable, must never be arrested or detained.
Wow. Never opened. That feels incredibly powerful. What about the diplomats themselves, their personal safety?
Right. Article 29 grants diplomatic agents inviolability of person. They cannot be arrested or detained in any form.
Okay.
And then Article 31 gives them immunity from the criminal jurisdiction of the host state. And from civil and administrative jurisdiction, too, though there are some very limited exceptions there.
Exceptions like?
Mostly things related to, say, private non-official stuff, like owning private property in the host country or maybe inheritance matters, things not tied to their official duties.
So while they're doing their job, they're pretty much beyond the reach of the host country's courts for most things.
Correct. It's what they call functional immunity. It's designed to allow them to perform their official duties without interference. They also get significant exemptions from taxes under Article 34 and customs duties under Article 36.
And does this cover their family, too?
Generally, yes. Article 37 says that family members who are part of the diplomat's household usually get the same privileges and immunities. Big caveat, though, provided they aren't nationals of the host state.
Okay, that makes sense. So those are the core protections. But what if a diplomat, abuses these privileges, or
Yeah.
the host country just really doesn't want them there. Is the host country stuck?
Not at all. And this is the crucial balancing act in the convention, Article 9. It gives the host state the right at any time and without even having to explain why.
Really? No explanation needed.
None. They can notify the sending state that the head of mission or any member of the diplomatic staff is persona non grata.
Persona non grata.
Oop.
Literally, person not welcome.
Exactly.
So what happens then?
The sending state is then obliged to recall that person or, end their job at the mission within a reasonable time. If they drag their feet, the host state can then refuse to recognize that person as a member of the mission, which effectively strips them of their immunity.
Ah, okay. So immunity isn't a permanent get-out-of-jail-free card if the host country decides someone's crossed a line. That makes sense. It stops the system being, well, completely open to abuse.
Precisely. It's a really carefully constructed balance, designed to let diplomacy function, but also respecting the sovereignty of the country hosting the mission.
So the VCDR sets the big rules, the foundation. But your sources make it really clear that applying these principles day to day involves incredibly detailed procedures, unique to each country, or maybe an organization like the UN.
Right. That's where the theory meets reality. It's one thing to say premises are inviolable in a treaty. It's another thing entirely to manage the daily logistics for hundreds, maybe thousands of diplomats in a capital city. That's where all these practical protocol rules come in.
Okay, so let's dive into some of those specifics.
Yeah.
Starting at the beginning, arrival. Is it just like, flying in for a holiday?
Oh, far from it, especially for senior people like ambassadors. Countries like China and Serbia, their guides spell out specific requirements. You need to give advance notice to their foreign ministry's protocol office before an ambassador even shows up or when they leave.
How much notice?
China asks for written notice a week ahead for arrivals. Serbia wants notification as early as possible for departures, and they also need to know who the chargé d'affaires AI will be.
Right, the chargé d'affaires ad interim. That's the temporary stand-in when the ambassador's away.
Correct. The interim head of mission. And the arrival itself isn't casual. The sources detail how a representative from the host country's protocol department usually meets senior diplomats right at the airport or train station.
VIP treatment, basically.
Pretty much. Access to VIP lounges, generally exempt from customs inspection on arrival and departure. It's a practical application of those VCDR principles.
What about the really formal bit? When an ambassador officially starts their job.
Ah, the presentation of credentials. That's usually to the head of state. And the sources, like the Serbian guide, they detail the formalities. It can even include reviewing a guard of honor.
Wow.
And the level of detail they ask for beforehand is quite something. Things like what language the ambassador will use for their formal speech, a list of who's accompanying them. Serbia says up to 5 staff.
5 staff, just for that ceremony.
Apparently. And get this, they often ask for the musical score for the ambassador's national anthem.
The actual sheet music.
Yep. Both China and Serbia mention needing the score for VIP visits or anthem playing. China's guide even specifies the dress code for the ambassador's arrival: national dress, suit, or formal attire.
Music scores, dress codes, staff lists. It really shows the level of, precision involved.
It does. It's all about creating a formal, respectful process that acknowledges the ambassador's role and the state they represent. Serbia also makes a little distinction. A non-resident ambassador, maybe one covering several countries, if they arrive by car, they might just be met at their hotel, not the full airport ceremony.
Okay, so they've arrived, they've presented credentials. How do they navigate daily life? Prove who they are?
Identification. Absolutely crucial. Mission members, and often their families too, have to apply for specific ID certificates. These are issued by the host country's authority, usually the foreign ministry.
Like a special diplomat ID card.
Exactly. China and Serbia's guides say these cards must be carried and shown on request. Switzerland's Foreign Affairs Department, the FDFA, calls them legitimation cards.
Are these IDs all the same for everyone at an embassy?
No, not usually. They often reflect status. In Serbia, for instance, they issue different colored ID cards, diplomatic, consular, service, and these correspond to different levels of privileges.
Interesting. And what about at international organizations? Like the UN? Is it similar?
The UN has its own system, naturally. Their protocol offices, say in New York or Vienna, they register the staff and their eligible family members. The UN New York Manual goes into the process electronic submissions, specific forms like SG.5 and SG.32, photos, passport scans. the works.
And they issue passes too, right?
Yes, they issue grounds passes for access to the UN buildings themselves.
Now, there was a detail about those UN ground passes in New York that seemed quite specific.
Ah, yes, that is a surprising limitation. The UNNY manual states pretty clearly that grounds passes are not issued to spouses of non-diplomatic staff, or to household employees, or even to the children of any staff member, diplomatic or not.
Really? Not even kids?
Nope. Access to the premises seems quite tightly controlled, focused on the core personnel doing the work. It's a different layer of access control compared to the country-level IDs, which often do cover eligible family.
And some staff don't get any special status at all, right?
Correct. In countries like Serbia, the sources are clear. Locally engaged staff people, the embassy hires directly in Serbia, Serbian nationals or residents. They do not get diplomatic privileges or immunities. They're subject to local laws just like anyone else.
Okay, so they've got their IDs. What about getting around, cars, driving?
Diplomatic vehicles are usually easy to spot. They often have special license plates, like an A prefix in Serbia or D plates at the UN in New York. Getting these involves specific applications to local authorities, the police in Serbia's case, or the garage administration at UNNY.
Do all embassy staff get the same plates?
Serbia's guide notes that administrative and technical staff also get the A plates, which shows they're linked to the mission. But they don't get the additional special oval plate that the actual diplomatic agents receive, so there's still a distinction.
And driving licenses. Do they need a local one?
Often depends on reciprocity with their home country. Both China and Serbia mention this. In Serbia, you generally have to replace your foreign license with a Serbian one, which involves an application process, including getting a certified translation of your original license.
Now, here's a classic question. What happens if a diplomat gets a parking ticket or caught speeding? Can they just waive their diplomatic ID and drive off?
Well, here's a point that might surprise you, and it's spelled out very clearly in sources like the Serbian Guide. Traffic violations, parking tickets, even getting your car towed for illegal parking. These are explicitly stated as not being violations of diplomatic immunity.
Get out, really?
Yep. The vehicle owner is required to pay the charges.
Wow. So immunity doesn't protect you from a parking fine in Serbia. That's a really clear, practical boundary on the whole principle.
Exactly. It shows how host states draw a line. They enforce basic public order rules, distinguishing them from challenges to criminal or civil jurisdiction. China's source also notes that mission members are obliged to respect road safety laws and face penalties for violations. The idea isn't diplomatic anarchy on the roads.
Right. It's functional protection for official duties, not a free pass for everything.
Precisely.
Are there any restrictions on where diplomats can travel within the host country?
Sometimes, yes. China has a specific rule mentioned. Mission members can't use their own cars for travel outside Beijing, except on certain designated highways, like to Tianjin or Beidahe in the Samul. And Serbia requires advance notification if diplomats plan to make official calls on local government officials outside the capital. Plus, there's a whole separate application process needed if they want to visit sensitive areas, like the source mentions for the Tibet Autonomous Region.
It really gets down to that level of granular detail, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Serbia's guide even details a system for duty-free fuel. It specifies quarterly quotas in liters based on the staff member's rank. It just illustrates the sheer administrative depth needed to manage all these privileges.
Speaking of privileges, importing goods must be a big one, given the customs exemptions in the VCDR.
Yes, and applying that principle requires detailed procedures. The guides from China and Serbia, they outline the steps. You need to formally apply for customs exemption for both official embassy goods and private stuff, often with requests signed by the head of mission.
But they can't just bring in, like, container loads of anything they want, duty-free.
No, definitely not. The sources mention this concept of a reasonable quantity. Customs authorities in both China and Serbia assess if the amount looks reasonable for direct use by the mission or the diplomat and their family. It's meant to prevent large-scale commercial activity happening under diplomatic cover.
Can their personal luggage or shipments ever be inspected? I thought immunity meant zero inspection.
Well, generally they are exempt, but there are conditional exceptions. It's about balancing immunity with the host state's security and regulatory needs. Customs can inspect luggage or goods if they have serious grounds to suspect prohibited items, controlled substances, or things clearly outside the scope of duty exemption.
But they can't just rip it open.
No. The key condition, usually, is that the inspection must happen in the presence of the diplomat concerned or their authorized representative. It adds a layer of protection. This possibility is noted in the sources, for example, regarding quarantine checks in China and Serbia.
Okay, so suspicion allows inspection, but with the diplomat watching. What about the diplomatic bag itself? We heard earlier that's totally inviolable.
The diplomatic bag remains the exception. Under the VCDR, it's absolutely protected never to be opened or detained. Full stop. However,
There's a however?
there are practical guidelines. China's source, for instance, gives maximum weight and size limits for bags, like a total batch can't exceed 1,000 kilograms, and an individual bag shouldn't be over 100 kilograms or bigger than 100 by 100 centimeters. Anything over that has to be declared differently as official articles, not under bag immunity.
So practical limits on size and weight.
Right, and Serbia's guide mentions procedures for handling really bulky bags at the airport. It also notes that customs can ask for a bag to be returned to sender if they suspect it contains non-official items, though crucially they still can't open it themselves.
So the principle holds, but local rules add these practical constraints.
Exactly. It's that layer of implementation. You see the same with taxes and fees. While missions and staff are exempt from many taxes, there are always exceptions and quite complex procedures. Well, Serbia's guide details specific applications needed for VAT and excise duty exemptions, or refunds. You need certificates from the foreign ministry, special official order forms. And it points out that exemption from property transfer tax when selling property only applies on a reciprocal basis and only when the mission itself is the seller.
So not if a diplomat sells their private apartment.
Likely not, unless reciprocity covers it. And another key detail from Serbia: honorary consular posts, which are different from embassies, are not exempt from VAT and excise duties at all.
It shows even tax exemption isn't always a simple blanket rule. What about everyday things like bringing pets?
Yep. Even pets get a mention. You need to declare animals and plants, comply with local quarantine rules. Both the China and Serbia documents touch on this, mentioning compliance with regulations for companion animals.
And accessing special facilities, maybe like a shop at a UN center.
Good point. The UN Vienna Guide mentions that getting into places like the commissary at the Vienna International Center requires specific ID issued by the host country authorities, Austria, in this case confirming your diplomatic privileges. So, UN access can be tied to host country recognition of status.
Okay, moving beyond physical stuff, what about communication gear? Or even personal security?
Right. For specialized communication equipment, things like radio transmitters, satellite dishes, you usually need permits. And you apply for these through the host country's protocol office. Approval, again, is often based on reciprocity. Same pattern as driver's licenses or vehicle plates, really, as seen in the China and Serbia guides.
And airport security. Going through the scanners. Are diplomats exempt from that?
Okay, here's another point that's pretty striking, and it comes up in both the Serbian and the Swiss FDFA guides. Despite their diplomatic status, individuals, the diplomats themselves, and their accompanying luggage are subject to security screening before boarding a plane.
They are. Seriously. So immunity doesn't get you past the metal detector or the X-ray machine.
That's right. The diplomatic bag is the only explicit exception mentioned as being exempt from search. But for the individual diplomat and their personal bags, normal security screening applies.
What if they refuse?
The sources add that bit too. If a diplomat refuses the screening of their luggage, the airline has the right to refuse to transport them or their bags. It's a very clear example of where national security protocols intersect with, and in this case, arguably override certain aspects of diplomatic convenience, though not core immunity.
That's a very tangible boundary. What about getting into restricted areas at the airport, like airside?
That usually requires special passes issued by host country authorities, and guess what?
Yes, reciprocity.
Often, yes, or based on specific mission needs. Ambassadors and maybe their spouses might have slightly easier access in some places just using their main IDs. Serbia hints at this. But generally, other staff need these dedicated airport passes. And consistent with other rules, locally engaged staff in Serbia typically are not entitled to these passes either.
Okay. What about something more sensitive, like carrying firearms? Can diplomats do that?
The Serbia document goes into detail here. Carrying firearms requires a permit. You get it via a formal request, a note verbal to the diplomatic protocol office. And yes, it's based on reciprocity.
Does it involve training?
It might require proof of handling competence, like training or a certified foreign permit. Though interestingly, security officers attached to the embassy and defense attaches are often exempt from that training requirement. There are even limits mentioned, like on ammunition, 60 rounds per year for rifled barrels in the Serbian case.
Wow, 60 rounds a year. Very specific.
And foreign security officers say accompanying a visiting VIP. They also need advance approval via diplomatic note to bring weapons in.
That just highlights how incredibly complex managing something like a high-level visit must be.
Oh, immensely. The sources from China and the UN in New York really show the level of detail. The UNNY guide needs advance notification for visits by cabinet ministers and anyone higher. China's requirements for state guests and other VIPs are just extensive.
Like what?
Biographical notes, specific music preferences for banquets, detailed delegation lists showing order of precedence, minute-by-minute travel plans, living habits, dietary restrictions, even flower restrictions. Blood type, samples of their country's flags.
Blood type, seriously.
Yep. Plus, advance applications for all sorts of things. Special clearance if they're arriving on a non-commercial flight, permission to bring firearms for their security detail, and yes, even permission for the delegation to use walkie-talkies.
It's not just booking meeting rooms, is it? It's managing their entire existence down to medical details and communication gadgets.
Every single detail is anticipated, planned, and processed through the protocol system. It's about ensuring security, dignity, and smooth operations. Another area covered is the status of spouses and families, things like jobs or studying.
Right. Can a diplomat spouse just go out and get a job in the host country?
Well, under the VCDR, gainful employment is generally restricted. But host countries can allow spouses to work. Often this is based on a specific bilateral agreement or, you guessed it, reciprocity.
But if they do work, do they keep their immunity for things related to the job?
Usually not. Sources like Serbia and China specify that even if permitted to work, the spouse typically does not enjoy immunity regarding matters related to that employment. They'd be subject to local labor laws, for instance.
Okay.
And studying.
China's rules give some interesting nuances here. Diplomats themselves might have to waive their privileges and immunities if they take, say, a short language course. Spouses, however, generally retain their P&I if they study, but adult children who came with the diplomat. If they want to do long-term study, they might actually need to change their passport and visa status, essentially separating their status from the diplomat's household for that purpose.
It's just layer upon layer of rules. It's clear these systems are incredibly detailed, almost. Overwhelmingly bureaucratic sometimes. They certainly can seem that way. But it's crucial to step back and see this not just as random red tape, but as a highly structured, quite intentional system. All these specific procedures, the forms, the notifications, even the distinctions they make between different types of official letters, like letters versus notes verbales mentioned in the UNNY manual, it all serves a purpose.
Which is?
To create a predictable, formal, and mutually understood framework for how states interact at the ground level.
And there are dedicated offices whose whole job is managing this complexity.
Absolutely. That's the core function of protocol departments within foreign ministries, like Switzerland's FDFA protocol, which the source shows is structured with specific sections for visits and ceremonies, and another for privileges and immunities, or China's protocol department, Serbia's diplomatic protocol. And at the UN, the protocol offices in Vienna and New York do the same for the international community there, managing registration, access, privileges. They're the gatekeepers and administrators.
We've heard reciprocity come up again and again.
Yeah.
How central is that principle to how all these rules actually get applied in practice?
Oh, it's fundamental. It's explicitly cited as the basis for granting many privileges and exemptions in the sources from China, Serbia, and Switzerland, whose FDFA guide actually mentions they actively monitor reciprocity.
Do they keep track?
Seems so. This mutual arrangement basically will grant your diplomats these specific courtesies or exemptions because you grant ours similar ones. It's really the engine driving much of the practical application of protocol that goes beyond the absolute minimums required by the VCDR. It encourages states to treat each other's diplomats well, creating a sort of positive feedback loop.
Does this whole system just stay frozen in time, or does it change? Does it evolve?
It absolutely evolves, and protocol documents, even seemingly dry ones, can reflect those shifts. That example from Japan's diplomatic blue book is fascinating.
Right, about the island's dispute with Russia.
Exactly. How the description of the sensitive Kuril Islands issue apparently changed across different annual editions, including, according to the sources, using the term illegal occupation in a draft for the 2022 version. Now, that's not just a minor wording tweak. It shows how even these official protocol-related documents can mirror significant shifts in national policy or diplomatic stance.
So it's not just ancient rules set in stone. It's actually a living system that adapts to the current geopolitical climate.
Precisely. While the core VCDR principles provide the stable foundation, the practical application, the interpretations, even the official language used within the system can subtly or sometimes not so subtly change over time. It reflects the dynamic nature of international relations itself.
So let's recap that we've taken quite a deep dive here. Started with the foundation, the Vienna Convention.
The VCDR, yeah.
Then moved through all these layers of specific rules in countries like China and Serbia at the UN, covering everything from how you formally arrive and get your ID card.
Navigating customs, driving rules, even that surprising detail about airport security screening.
Right? And parking tickets, and the rules around carrying firearms. It's incredibly detailed.
And the key takeaway, I think, is that these aren't just random, fussy rules or bureaucratic hurdles for the sake of it. They form the essential administrative scaffolding that actually makes day-to-day diplomacy possible.
Exactly. They create the necessary predictability, don't they? They ensure communication channels can stay open, and they strike that careful balance between letting diplomats do their jobs effectively.
While also respecting the sovereignty and, importantly, the security concerns of the host country.
By digging into these details, the specific forms, the permissions needed, the limits on things like the size of the diplomatic bag or how much fuel you can buy duty-free, you really get a unique perspective, I think, a perspective on the sheer administrative effort involved.
Just to allow states and international bodies to interact smoothly on a daily basis, it really is the hidden machinery of global engagement.
It does make you think about all the effort that goes into the seemingly mundane stuff before you can even get to the table for the big, high-stakes negotiations.
It really does. And maybe here's a thought for you, the listener, to ponder as we wrap up.
Okay.
Considering this immense effort, this incredible level of detail that goes into managing smooth administrative protocol, everything from ID cards and car plates to customs and security screening, what does this level of complexity inherently tell us about the foundation states need? The groundwork required just to begin engaging in the truly critical negotiations and interactions of global diplomacy? How does meticulously adhering to these detailed, sometimes seemingly trivial rules actually contribute to building the necessary trust, or maybe just preventing unnecessary friction, on the world stage?